from my music studio here in beautiful Greenbrier County, West Virginia. And how I wish we could all be together, but I thought maybe it was time for a celebration, and the composer I would want to celebrate with would be my old friend Franz Liszt. And I remember when I was a little girl, the first composition of Liszt that I heard was played by Bugs Bunny, and he was playing the Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. Saturday cartoons, maybe you remember that, and actually it was a terrific performance. And after hearing that, I remember saying, oh, one day I want to play that piece, because that's when I fell in love with it. And when Liszt was a little boy, he would go to sleep at night, and outside his window he would hear the gypsy musicians getting ready for the big festivities. And most of them couldn't read a note of music, but they would warm up outside of his window and start to improvise with scales and lots of cadenzas, which of course Liszt used in his Hungarian Rhapsodies. And then, of course, then the festivities would begin. The whole village would come out and there would be dancing and laughter, and it was a fun party. And Liszt used this model for his Hungarian Rhapsody. So the first part begins slowly, and that's the warming up, and you'll hear lots of cadenzas there, and then followed by the fast section when everybody's celebrating. And at the very end, actually, of the piece, you will hear this very elaborate cadenza, and you'll think that Liszt wrote it, but actually it was written by a student of Liszt, Eugene d'Albert. I recently discovered it and thought, oh, I have to include this in the Hungarian Rhapsody. So here for us to celebrate with is Liszt's second Hungarian Rhapsody. much fun that is to play. It's really a fun piece. And of course, I can imagine the way Liszt would have played it. And I know that every time he would have played it, he would have played it differently because he would have improvised even more cadenzas than you heard in that piece. But Liszt was such a master at the keyboard. He did everything with such ease. In fact, I think he was born to play the piano. That was obvious because, of course, he was a child prodigy. But what he did for the keyboard was quite extraordinary. In fact, he revolutionized piano playing with his virtuosity. He laid the foundation for that grand bravura pianism. And of course, he influenced every composer who followed him. I mean, when you think of the music of Rachmaninoff, Prokofiev, Ginastera, Scriabin, Ravel, Debussy, the foundation of the pianism really does belong to Liszt. They have Liszt to thank for that. And when I talk about his music being so pianistic, when I say it fits under the hands, that doesn't mean it's not difficult. But it means that it is so well written because he knows the instrument, because he was a virtuoso, and he knew how to write for it, and so sometimes it even sounds more difficult than it is, if you can fathom that thought. But I think the pivotal moment in Liszt's life was, I think it was around 1832, when the great Nicolo Paganini came to Paris, and Liszt happened to be in the audience. Now, Paganini was labeled the devil of the violin. I mean, he was a superstar, and all of his concert tours were always sold out. You couldn't even get a ticket to hear Paganini. But Liszt happened to be in the audience, and he heard Paganini play those unaccompanied caprices that he wrote. I think he wrote 24. And Liszt at that point said, I am going to transcribe these pieces and make them even more difficult for the piano, which I think he did do, except I know that violinists who struggle with these caprices would argue with me because I know they are phenomenally difficult for the violin. But let me play for you a few measures from one of them. Let's transcribe 6 of these because you will hear the way he tries to imitate the spiccato, the way the violin bow bounces over the string. So listen to what he does. Notes that Paganini wrote for the violin and just made a piano piece out of them, but you can still imagine the violinist playing that. Now, he also transcribed the 24th caprice of Paganini. That's, I think, the most well-known. That's the theme that Rachmaninoff used for his Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini for piano and orchestra. And it's really a set of variations. But what's interesting is when you hear the violin version, even though the notes really remain the same, when you transpose it to a different instrument, it really does change. And we saw that with the Bach. When Liszt transcribed Bach's organ fugue to the piano, it became an entirely different piece. The same thing happens with the Paganini etudes. So this is Liszt's piano version, and I think violinists would argue with me that theirs is more difficult, and I would say no, for the piano it's more difficult, but we'll let you decide. But it's lovely to see what he could do at the piano. Liszt's 6 Paganini etudes, and he owes a great deal to Mr. Paganini. And of course, later on, Liszt wrote his own set of etudes, and there's a monumental set called the 12 Transcendental Studies. And Liszt toured with these, and the trouble was that he was the only one who could play them. They were that difficult. And during his Weimar years, this was the period after he retired from the concert stage where he was teaching master classes to a lot of well-known pianists. His pianist urged him, his students said, please, maestro, transcribe these, revise this edition so we can perform them. And of course, I think there are 3 editions, and the 3rd and final edition is the edition that most pianists use to perform these transcendental studies. Now, that's not saying that they're easier, that much easier, because they're still difficult, because remember, these were written as technical compositions. They were written to really focus on one technical problem. But in Liszt's hands, each one of them became a monumental composition. And I've chosen for you 2 to play. The first one I've nicknamed the Beethoven 5th Etude, because you will hear that theme, ba-ba-ba-bum. You'll hear it throughout. And you'll really see what Liszt can do on the keyboard. Of course, he uses the entire keyboard. And he knows how to write for the keyboard. So when we say that something is pianistic, that it fits under the fingers, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy. But once we learn to overcome the difficulties, we realize how well written for the keyboard it is. So in Liszt's hands, he could do anything at the keyboard. He could whisper, he could thunder, as you will hear in these pieces. So here is the Beethoven 5th, 2nd Transcendental Study. Now you understand why I call it the Beethoven Fifth Etude. And of course, Liszt was such an admirer of Beethoven. In fact, he did so much for his music. It was Liszt really that introduced the world to the late Beethoven sonatas, and of course he transcribed all of Beethoven's symphonies for the piano alone, solo piano, so that he could play them in the concerts and introduce a wider audience who didn't have access, say, to a symphony orchestra to hear these compositions. And of course, he was very influenced by Beethoven, and you hear that throughout his music. But you see that when we play Liszt, we have to take that no prisoners approach. In fact, I think of performing his music as if we're walking on a tightrope without a safety net. It has to be that way. It can't be done cautiously. I mean, in other words, you practice so you can do that on the stage. And then let me play for you the last of his transcendental studies, and I've nicknamed this one the Snowstorm, even though we shouldn't be talking about snow in the summertime, because it will come eventually. But Liszt really creates a tone picture of a snowstorm. And of course, you'll hear in the beginning, the snowflakes are kind of falling gently. In fact, he makes us think they're not going to stick on the ground, but eventually they keep getting more forceful. And then in the middle section, you will hear my left hand, the wind blowing, and I'll try and point that out to you. And then what Liszt does, from the bottom of the keyboard, he creates this, what sounds like a blizzard, just using the sonorities of the piano, and it's quite amazing what he can do. This is what I mean. I think he could do anything at the keyboard, and you will hear that. So let me play for you the Snowstorm, and I will try to apprise you of the weather conditions as I play it. amazing piece, and it's a wonderful example of what we call tone painting. Painting pictures at the piano. I hope you could experience that snowstorm without having to drive in it. But snow is beautiful, and I think Liszt captures the beauty of it, and I also feel it captures the loneliness of it. And since we started this celebration with an old chestnut, I thought it would be appropriate to end with another favorite by Liszt, and it's his Dream of Love. And I remember years ago when I used to introduce this piece in one of my programs, I would flippantly say, oh, Liszt must have sat down and played this for many a beautiful female, because of course Liszt had a reputation of being sought after by the ladies. And then I happened to read the words that inspired the song, because these Liebesdrams started out as songs for voice and piano, and then Liszt transcribed his own music, actually, and made it into a piano piece. And as the verse goes, it's a very poignant poem about a man standing over the grave of his beloved and really grieving for her and remembering the happy times, the sad times, and I think that's why it's everybody's favorite. So here is Liszt's Liebesdraum, the Dream of Love. Another beauty by Franz Liszt, and now we know why it's everybody's favorite. And I hope you've enjoyed our little celebration. Hopefully we can celebrate together again soon, maybe in person. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? But in the meantime, stay well and stay safe. And it's been such a pleasure visiting with you. And I've enjoyed sharing Liszt's music with you. As you know, he's one of my favorite guys, and he brings lots of joy to lots of people. And we need joy in our life, don't we? So thanks again, and stay safe.